Happy Sunday morning. And we're coming at you with another episode here today. And yeah, just doing this one kind of early again today and Sunday morning. Didn't get a whole lot of good rest last night. Um, I'm getting of that age now where, well, two things. We're still trying to help one of my daughters sleep train. And so sometimes we'll have to lie next to her to get her to go to sleep. But then I'm also of that age now where it seems like, one little thing and I'll wake up in the middle of the night and then I just have a hard time going back to sleep. And it seems to be especially on my days off, which means probably why I'm just a lot of times just kind of exhausted on my days off and all, but that's okay. Got my little Starbucks iced matcha latte to sort of refresh me this morning, and kind of excited to talk about for what I got planned for this podcast. Here's took some notes down here, and also I think this one will be a little bit more in depth than my previous ones. And my hope is that eventually, as I keep going through the years, right, I'll have more to talk about and all, as I'm just doing a little bit more research as much as I can, and then also just as I get into the years that I personally was aware of what was going on, I'll have some more information on that too. Um, but just to kind of reiterate again, and also, I do try to get some good information on here as far as facts and all of what happened in the video game industry. But the whole purpose of my podcast, though, is just mainly to have a casual conversation, almost like as if you're just talking with someone, right? And all, unless you're just like an encyclopedia of like video game knowledge and you have all this information fresh in your mind, it's just sort of, you're talking with a friend and you're just talking about things and all. And so some things I may not get completely correct and all that. But I will try to make some um, updates though and all if I feel like I got something wrong and something that I previously said. So on that note there, I mentioned in my last podcast that Intellivision was from Activision, and that was actually not correct. So Activision did port some games over to the Intellivision, but it was Mattel actually who was the distributor or the of the Intellivision. So just wanted to update on that real quick. But yeah, let's see. So there was some. I got some information here also regarding like more modern gaming information, as we just had Gamescom happen last week, and so there was some information on there that came out that I did want to at least touch base on a little bit. So we'll go over that there as well too. But for now, let's gonna talk about a bit of the games that I played last week from the Relay of Gaming. And so didn't get a whole lot of time to spend with them, so I'm not gonna have too much information on these. But I did get a, mess around with them a bit. And so starting off with Kingdom Under Fire for Heroes. So yeah, it's a great game. It runs really well on the Steam Deck, where I played it on. And I just played through like the first part of it, because it puts you right, you basically you select I think you right off the bat you can select two characters, I think is what I saw. And there was what Walter, and I forgot who the other character was. But you start off, you're commanding your little army, and then at the press of one of the bumper buttons, you can select like if you want your archers or if you want to control the cavalry, and you just start marching towards battle and just on a map selecting who you want to, where you want to target your or where you want your army to go, and then if you meet the enemy forces, you'll engage in battle. And so there's some strategy to it and all, where there's like these camps there, and you want to burn them down to the ground, so you select your archers and select their fire arrow option to shoot so that they can launch arrows at it and burn it down. And yeah, I mean, it's really fun. The combat is pretty basic, but it's just pretty hectic and all, with all the characters on screen and all. And I thought that was pretty fun. But I kind of got stuck in it though, because there was one area though where I wasn't quite sure exactly what to do, and so then after a while I just ended up stop playing it. But I played it for about 45 minutes or so and all, and so yeah, I mean, it's definitely a cool game. It's on par with what Kingdom Under Fire Crusaders was. So for those two games, it's a great series. And as I was looking up some stuff on the game, I think there was a Kingdom Under Fire 2 that came out more, somewhat more recently. But I believe I saw something that it's like some kind of a MMORPG. So it looks like they went in a completely different direction. And if that's the case, I don't even know if that game would still have its servers up. But But yeah, but for what it is, though, Kingdom of the Fire Heroes or Crusaders, right? Either one, great games. And then I did play a bit of a Final Fantasy Tactics Advance, and I really liked what I played. I did enjoy this game. It's I'm for me strategy RPGs. I like them; they're fun. But the one thing that kind of puts me off on them though is because I'm not the greatest at them, and if the battles are kind of drawn out and long, and then if you die, and then you have to go all the way back, right, and basically if you have to replay a lot of it, it is a bit of a turnoff for me. So I'm not sure how bad this one will be on that, but from what I played though, it definitely held my interest. And it's a charming little adventure, and I'm always a sucker for fantasy stories that you're like in the modern times, and then somehow you get whisked away to some kind of a fantasy land. So, for example, like the Never-Ending Story, for the movie that came out back in the '80s. I'm just a fan of that kind of stuff and all. And so this one seems to have kind of the same sort of setup. Only the fantasy land that you go back to is very reminiscent of like from Final Fantasy 12 because it takes place in the same world. I believe Ivalice, I believe is what it's called. And so it has that backdrop to it and all. Like you see a lot of the same sort of species of characters, right? And all in this, like what do they call the bangas or whatever they're the kind of lizard looking enemies and all. There's actually a funny little joke reference to that there in the game that at least up to the point that I played, and I like it. I think it's a very charming adventure, and I think I'm going to put it into my rotation of games to play on one of my devices. So I have like my RG35XX Plus, and which is very kind of looks like a Game Boy almost. And I like playing like old school games or handheld games on there. And also, I think that'll be a game that I'll have in my rotation when I'm playing that because I didn't get to play it a whole lot again. I got played like about maybe 30 to 45 minutes of it, and most of that time though was just through a tutorial and then also just a lot of talking, and also that's, sometimes these games can get a little talky with a lot of like the Square Enix games and all as they're trying to teach you the mechanics and all and set up the story. So there was a bit of like, okay, come on, let's get this game going and all. But I think I got to a good stopping point where I think the game's gonna move along a little bit faster now. But yeah, but I really dug it though. I think it's a very charming adventure, and I'm kind of excited to keep going through it. And then there's Dark Souls. And so I'd mentioned before that, I don't know, it was a few years ago when I first played it. I gave it a shot. I played it for a couple hours or so at least. And I got a little ways into it where I was eventually on a castle, but kind of like at the top of a castle and, just fighting enemies up there. But I started a new game just so I can get an idea of, again, what's going on with it. Because I had forgotten a lot of it. And again, I played it for like 45 minutes, and I didn't play it in the best scenario. Like, I played it there in the living room. My wife and I were just hanging out, and so and I was playing it on the portal. And when I was playing it, my internet might have been kind of lagging a little bit, and so there was, the game was lagging a bit, and I kind of got lost in it. I couldn't get out of like the first little castle area. I got one key and it opened up a door, but then I found another door and I needed a key apparently, and I couldn't find it. And so then after all, I was like, forget it, So I didn't give that one too much of a honest chance. But it's just the thing about those games. There is that you really have to put some time into it and all to explore to kind of figure out the boss patterns and all that, and it's sometimes I just don't have the energy for that kind of stuff and all. And I think that's what keeps putting me away from those Dark Souls games, or like really a lot of Souls-like games. It's just you do have to have a lot of patience and to want to learn the whole intricacies of all the systems, the mechanics to it and all. And then nowadays I just don't always have that for a game that I want to enjoy, but I'm not fully into it. Because there's been a handful of games where it's like where it takes a bit of time for me to learn the systems and all that, but I'm really interested in it. Where like Souls games, I want to learn them, but my interest in them isn't completely peak where I'm gonna take the dedicate a lot of time and energy and all to try to learn them. I'm just not there with the Souls games and all. So the one that I have kind of gotten into, and I'm a little ways into it, is Elden Ring. So maybe if I can keep going through that one, and if I can somehow beat it eventually, maybe that'll kind of open up my eyes more on them, but we'll see. Um, but yeah, but that's all I got for those last 2 games from last week, and so now we're gonna do this week's edition of Roulette of Gaming. And so I added a few more games, and so we're up to 1,256 now. And the way I add games and all is like I have access to a ton of games from things that I've emulated and all that, and just or sometimes if I'm just watching random YouTube videos and all, and then I come across a game that someone mentions, I'll add it to the list. But I added a few more games here, and let's see. I'm just gonna try a little something here just for fun. I don't know if I'm gonna keep doing this, but just found like a little sound bit here that I'll play as I'm going through my randomized list here. So let's see. It's basically a sound effect of a roulette wheel, which I know what I'm doing is not really a roulette wheel. It's just, I don't know, just a name that I gave it, I guess. But let's see. So let's start off here then. Okay. Okay, so we have number 273. So let's see what that brings up. Donkey Kong Country. No, perfect timing too, since I'm playing the Donkey Kong Bonanza. All right, cool. Let's see. Let's try the next one. Okay, we're at 891. What do we got here? Oh, nice. Sin and Punisher Star Successor. Okay. Means I gotta bust out the Wii or the Wii U for that one. Okay. And now for the next one. We got 437. Let's see what we got. 437. Gran Turismo 7. Okay. Interesting choices. So, all right, perfect. Let's see. So I can talk a bit about these, at least more so than last week. So Donkey Kong Country. Ah, man, this game was, 1994 was a big year for the Super Nintendo, I feel, because we had games like Super Metroid, Final Fantasy, well, 3, what it was known at the time, Super Punch-Out, and then also Donkey Kong Country that came out towards later part of 1994. And so this was developed by Rare, and so they had a pretty close relationship with Nintendo at the time, and enough so that, I mean, Nintendo trusted them with their, pretty popular but somewhat dormant IP at the time of Donkey Kong. And so what Rare was able to do, so Rare was really experimenting with a lot of like silicon graphics and all, and where you started taking like this CG computer graphic models that we were seeing back then in movies and all, like say like something like Toy Story, but then molding it into a sprite, so to speak, right, that you can play. I don't even know if that's the right terminology to use as far as what they did with the technology, but basically it made for a really cool effect. And for the characters where they kind of had I mean, Donkey Kong Country is a 2D side scroller, but the effect and all was pretty impressive. All where they made the models almost look like 3D, like in a way. But you still had the really good 2D backgrounds, a lot of cool parallax scrolling and all, and then ultimately the main thing about the game, right, which was made it really popular, was it's a really well made platformer. It's really fun, and definitely was up there with the best of like the Mario games. And so it brought Donkey Kong back into the spotlight. And yeah, I mean, it was a big seller for Nintendo at the time. They were starting to do the new ad campaign to kind of compete against Sega, is where Sega had the attitude, Sega does when Nintendo don't, and they were just more in your face. Where Nintendo, I think, kind of had to play hardball and punch back at that, where they had their Play It Loud series, I think is what it was called, and I think Donkey Kong was sort of the part of that advertisement there. But This is where, I mean, like I said, from 1994 and on is where the Super Nintendo in the last couple of years of its lifetime really had some great hits. And again, the Donkey Kong Country series was part of that, because then it had part two and then part three, from that came out in the following years, and they were all really well received, really great, really pushed the Super Nintendo's graphical limits, really fun to play, and definitely made for an awesome trilogy of games. I've only played the first one, and I haven't beaten it. I actually have a save game where I'm kind of far into it. I've been playing it on the Nintendo Switch Online, and it's the farthest that I've ever made it in the game. But haven't quite beaten it yet. But yeah, just been having fun with it, because I started playing it a little bit in preparation for Donkey Kong Bonanza. So I think I just need to kind of hunker down and get around to beating the game. So maybe I'll try to do that here in this next stretch in this next week, because I'm a little ways into it. So I feel like I'm getting close towards the end, but I haven't really looked up like how long the game is or anything. But I mean, I've beaten several bosses. I forgot where I left off, but yeah, it's a great game though. It's a great platformer. Definitely one of the best on the Super Nintendo. But then Sin and Punishment Star Successor. So there was a Nintendo 64 game, Sin and Punishment, that had come out, but only in Japan. Well, at least at the time. The part one, you can actually play it now on the Nintendo Switch Online service. If you have like the expanded family pack, I think it's called, where you can have access to Nintendo 64 games. And that game's cool. They're both of these, that one and then this one that I'm talking about here, are made by Treasure, and they're sort of like on rail shooters where you're controlling a character, and you can control the character to an extent where you can move him up, down, left, right, and then it has like a jump button, and then you're pointing a cursor on the screen, a reticle, and where you're aiming it to shoot the enemy. And so Sin and Punishment and Star Successor came out on the Wii, and it was actually one of my more favorite games on that system there. Um, aside from the Nintendo games on the Wii, I'm not the biggest fan of the Wii. I mean, I like it, but for the Nintendo games, but there wasn't a whole lot other than that though. But this is one of the third party games though that I really did like, and I mean, it's really fun. The using the Wiimote it's like one of the few games that I really actually liked using the Wiimote on, and it's a challenge. Like I said, it's kind of like an on rail shooter, but the action on it is pretty fast paced. It's pretty fun. It runs really smooth at 60 frames per second, and it's just a great shooter. And again, another great game from Treasure. They're one of my more favorite developers out there. I just like their unique style. The Treasure games just definitely feel different in a good way. And yeah, I mean, this is a great game. Um, and I'm a little ways into it. I have it on the uh, so I have a Wii U. Because I got rid of my Wii some time ago, but I bought a Wii U about a couple of years ago, and I mainly bought it just for the Wind Waker HD and Twilight Princess HD, because those games haven't been ported yet. Well, I mean, I guess now we kind of have the Wind Waker on the Nintendo Switch Online on the Switch too. But at the time when I bought it, I just didn't have any hope that those games were going to come out, and so that's why I mainly bought it for. But because you can also use it as a Wii, I've kept around a handful of Wii games for it, like Mario Galaxy series, Punch Out, the Metroid Prime trilogy, and then I at the time, right, because I got it right before the Wii U shop closed, I got Star Successor, this one, Sin and Punishment, because I had played it back in the day, like way back in the when the Wii first came out, and it was a game that I really liked. So I was like, oh, it was like I better snag this game before the shop closes, and yeah, so I was playing it actually a couple months ago, and I didn't beat it, but I got a little ways into it. So this is another game too I can pick up and play where I left off on fairly recently. I just got to dig out my Wii. That didn't sound right. I got to dig out my Wii U and get it plugged into one of my TVs here. But yeah, it's a fun game. My only kind of complaint about, well, two things I guess on it is, so I don't have, I mean, the two TVs that I have that I can plug it into, I have they're both OLED TVs, and uh, games on the Wii, or whether if you're running them backwards compatible on the Wii U, they basically scale up to like 480p. I don't know, like if on the Wii U, if it tries to upscale it more, but basically it looks 480p. And when you're seeing games in 480p blown up on a on a newer TV, they look kind of ugly. Um, it's just, they don't clean up the best and all, yeah, because the graphics themselves are decent enough. I mean, it's looking like at a good 6th gen graphics. It's just again the 480p, and it just can't output that well on these modern TVs. It does look kind of rough, but it runs smooth at 60 frames per second, and also but my other complaint though is the character designs um on this game are pretty bad. I don't know, the characters just look kind of weird, but it's like whatever. The action is cool, has cool music to it and all. It's definitely a fun, fast-paced game that yeah, I'll be excited to try to check out this week. And then the next one that I picked here was Gran Turismo 7. So I'm not the biggest fan of Gran Turismo games. My brother and a friend of his, back when the first 2 came out, they were obsessed with those games, but, I would play them, and I couldn't really get into them that much. Because I started telling myself at the time, because I like the concept of it, right? I like cars, I mean, I'm not a big car nut, but I like cars, and I thought it was cool, right, that you can select, like, real life cars and all, and at the time, the graphics look really realistic, and then especially as the years went on, Gran Turismo has always kind of been a game that sets the bar for graphic fidelity, right? I mean, the game just looks, you know, for the time frame that it came out, the graphics look really good. Like it's almost to the point when I mean, like when I'm playing Gran Turismo 7, I'm like, well, the graphics don't really look that good just because it looks so real, and then after you start realizing, oh yeah, but this is not real though. But anyways, so I haven't been, I'm not the biggest fan of Gran Turismo, but I usually like getting the games though from time to time, just because I just love seeing the graphics of him. And I do have some fun with it, as I start getting into the races and all. But I got this one again mainly sort of to have a showpiece for the PlayStation 5, and I haven't gone too deep into it, so because I know that they made some changes at least at one point. I don't know if they reverted back to the old, to the previous version, but I know that I think it was just like making it harder to advance in the game, like almost like trying to monetize the game or something like that. I know there was a bit of a controversy with the game, a little bit after it launched. I forgot what it was, but I've been playing it here and there, and yeah, I mean I'm having fun with it. I do like the sort of kind of RPG mechanics to it and all, right, where you're saving money to buy a new car, get it all tuned up, right, and all, and then saving money so you can get more cars and advance further in it and get your licenses and all that. Uh, but and it was fun. But my wife actually got me it was last Christmas, and she got me a racing wheel with it. But it's kind of cool though because it has so it's she got me like this kind of like a platform, and it sort of folds up and down, and so you can adjust it to your height level, and then you can attach the wheel to it, and it works pretty good because I can it's set up. I can set it up perfectly where I can have it right in front of me in the couch, right as I'm playing it on the big screen TV in the living room, and then on the bottom of the platform it has like a flat surface where it has the pedal and the brakes. And so ever since then, that's the way I prefer playing Gran Turismo. It's just really fun to play, and I feel like I do a lot better actually with that wheel. I think it's made from Hori. I think it's the name of the brand that made the wheel. I believe. I'm not sure, but yeah, it works really good. It's fun, and I actually like busting it out from time to time just to get a few laps in there and all, because it's just a lot funner to play that game that way. Although I will say I've tried using the wheel on some of the other racing games, like more arcadey kind of games, and I have a hard time with those. I like using it for Gran Turismo 7 because it's more slower paced, and I feel like I'm more in control of the vehicle with the wheel setup and the brake and pedal, where I can't really do that on more faster racing games. But yeah, so I've actually been enjoying Gran Turismo 7 here in this past several months ever since she got me that wheel setup, racing wheel setup. So yeah, it's pretty cool. But yep, that's what I got. So I'll play around with these a little bit, and they're all games that I'm somewhat familiar with, and I'm already kind of in the middle of already, you can say. So I'll just kind of add a bit more gameplay to it this week, and I'll see if I can try to beat Donkey Kong Country because I feel like I'm getting close, um, but yeah. So that's what I got here for Role of Gaming. And so let's talk a little bit about just the modern gaming stuff that happened. So we had a Gamescom that happened. And I'm going to be honest, I didn't completely follow up on every single little thing on it. So what I'm going to talk about here, I was watching some of Gamescom while I was working, and so I just jotted down some information. But it's just something that kind of like caught my eye really quick, right? Nothing. So and then I think I watched like a video or two or so just to try to keep up with what's going on. But even then, I don't think I was paying too much attention to the video. Like I said, I'm doing this while I'm working and all, and here with my girls and all that. And I was trying to listen to a podcast of it yesterday when I was cooking outside yesterday. So like I said, this is just very sporadic information that I was just sort of able to pick up. But something that I was like, oh yeah, that looks kind of cool. But for Hollow Knight fans, you finally got your day, September 4th. It looks like Silksong is coming out. So cool. I've tried Hollow Knight. Hollow Knight is kind of like Dark Souls for me, where I've tried it. I like the concept of it. I love the artwork to it. I'm a huge Metroidvania fan. It seems like something that I would really get into. I love the animation, the moody setting, and all that. For some reason, it just doesn't click with me, though. I don't know what it is. It just doesn't click with me. And because it's not, it's a Metroidvania, but it's more vague. I mean, and then I don't know, something about the game and all that. It throws me off as far as like how to keep advancing in the game and all. And so again, it's very much like Dark Souls for me, where it's like I like the concept of it and all, but there's just something about the game that throws me off. Part of it is the challenge and all, but I haven't even got. Well, I mean, I haven't. It's not like I've died a lot in the game up to the point where I've gotten to, anyways. But it's just kind of the more vagueness of it. And I mean, it's just, and the reality is, it's just as I get older, I just don't have a whole lot of time for me to say I'm going to explore a world and really get lost in it and all that. And if it's not really, if the point of the game is kind of like where it doesn't have a lot of hand holding, and I know that sounds kind of sacrilege to say as a gamer, where you want to have a challenge and all, but I don't know, some of these games, it just feels like if I'm not like really invested in it, something that I really want to play, my attention span to try to figure out a game and all is just not going to quite be there. And unfortunately, I haven't really been able to find that with Hollow Knight. But it's not a game I've given up the on, right? One of these days, I do want to maybe try to really sit down and play it. And now that Silksong is out, maybe that'll give me the motivation to try to beat this one. And then if Silksong ends up getting good reviews from what it sounds like it will, then maybe that'll be my motivator, right, to try to finally get into Hollow Knight. But I think that's cool. I mean, for everyone that I know that's a very beloved game. So I'm happy for the people that were really excited for this. As I know if you've been waiting forever for a release date, but there you are, September 4th. Lords of the Fallen 2, that looked pretty amazing. I'm not too familiar with the first one, but I was just looking at the trailer that they did for this one. I was like, oh wow, that looks cool. Again, another kind of Souls-like. So it's one of those games that I probably won't play, but I mean, it looks cool. And Project Spectrum, this one caught my interest when I was looking at it. Like I said, right, I just had the volume down, so I wasn't paying too much attention as they were talking about it. And at first I thought it was like a Resident Evil. I was like, what is this? But it's Project Spectrum. And so my first thought it was just some kind of like a first-person shooter of some sort, maybe almost in the vein of like those Fear games that came out back in the 7th generation. But I think I heard something, though, that it was like some kind of a tactical shooter. I could be wrong on that, but I think I heard something like that. But the concept of the game looked cool, for what I saw, but I guess I don't have much more information on that. But they showed more of Resident Evil Requiem, which I thought looked, it looks good. I'm excited for that game. The new stalker, weird looking creature thing. I was like, oh damn, that looks pretty messed up. So, but yeah, I mean, Resident Evil games, they usually don't let me down. So I'm excited about that one. There's a few series that, as long as they're good and all, or from certain developers, that I will probably still try to get as years go on. As I'm really scaling back on my video game purchases and all, of like newer stuff. But Resident Evil is one of those series, though, that as long as it's good and all that, I'll continue to probably get the game. But there was also He-Man, a 2D beat 'em up or hack and slash, I should say, of He-Man, and the art style looks very much reminiscent to like the '80s cartoon. I did not have that on my bingo card, as they say, and I didn't see it at first. It wasn't until I was trying to watch another video, kind of like recapping the Gamescom announcements that they made, and somebody in the comments said, "I can't wait for the He-Man game." I was like, "Wait, what? The He-Man game?" So I started, forwarding through videos and all like, what are they talking about? And so then I found the trailer, and yeah, I was like, oh man, I'm so excited for that. If it plays anything like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge, I'm all about it. Another cool 2D action game. Um, yes, just gimme, gimme, gimme. That sounds so awesome. Very excited for that. Um, and also, just kind of wanted to touch base on something here that I just made a list of some games here that not all of these were shown at the Gamescom, but just something that I kept noticing, right, as we're starting to see a bit of a shift in the video game industry where, Japanese games have still been kind of holding on. Um, More Western developed games, whether if it's here like in the States or Europe and such, they've been struggling, right? I mean, and you can blame that for a lot of different reasons, but I feel like they've been struggling as far as trying to find like their identity and market and all that, as a lot of them seem to be going to this live service thing and all. And, and there's a lot of different reasons why and all. I think that, the gaming market and the, for Western developers has been, kind of failing a bit. But China, though, there's been a lot of stuff coming out from China. And I mean, I was just kind of starting to pay attention to it. I was like, there is a lot of stuff coming out from here. And I mean, I just made a list of some stuff here, but it's like Where Winds Meet, Black Myth Zongqi. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but it seems to be like a successor of some sort or all to Black Myth Wukong. Blood Message, Wu Chang, Lost Souls Aside, Phantom Blade Zero, Marvel Rivals. I mean, all games that if they've already come out, they're finding some success. Admittedly, a lot of them are like Souls-like, and also that's why I'm not, too interested in a lot of them. But they look cool though, like graphics-wise and everything and all that, And if you like Souls-like games, I mean, they seem to be pretty, pretty well done. Marvel Rivals, I mean, it's a very I played it a little bit just because I am a big fan of Marvel, and I played it a little bit and all, but again, I'm just not too much into those kind of games. But it looks cool. I love the art style to it and all, and it seems like its success has probably been helping keep Marvel afloat since they're not doing too well as far as like movies, and I'm not sure how their comics are doing. But this game is really popular though. But the one game though that I am pretty interested in, and this got announced about a year ago, I think, give or take, and I'm not sure when it's coming out, but it really has my attention. It's called Tides of Annihilation. Um, it's like it seems like to take place like in like some kind of a European setting of some sort, but it has like these massive looking bosses and really cool settings and all that. And it looks amazing from the last time I saw the trailer of it. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of cool stuff coming out from China. So it's interesting how they're sort of like well, I wouldn't say that they're the leaders now as far as like in the gaming scene. I don't know. I don't know what like the sales are and all that compared to like other regions of the world, but I know that a lot of the big games that are hits, like I mean, Black Myth Wukong and Marvel Rivals were huge hits, and so a lot of these other games too, and all right, are starting to garner attention. So yeah, just thought I'd make a mention of that, and all. It's just interesting, right? That we're seeing another region come out with a lot of cool stuff. But probably the coolest thing though that I saw that I'm really interested in that came out of this Gamescom is something that I never saw coming. Never thought I would even really look forward to it. But it's the Lego Batman game. I mean, I'm a big fan of Batman, and that this one is kind of doing what the Skywalker saga did with that they did for the Lego game, where it's going through all the Star Wars movies and all. This seems to be doing it, but with all the Batman movies, and yet it looks kind of like a place, kind of like the Arkham games. I'm like, where did this come from? But I again, I'm not. I've messed around a little bit with the Lego games. I can take them or leave them. I'm not, they're cool, they're fun, but nothing I'm too interested in. But this one, again, I think I am though, just because like I said, I'm such a huge Batman fan, and probably the game that I got most excited for, aside from the He-Man beat 'em up too awesome. So I mean, hey, sure, I'll take him. But Yeah, just some things I wanted to mention though about the Gamescom that just happened. There's probably a lot of other announcements that were made that I'm missing. Again, I just sort of, um, just jotted some quick things down on, what kind of caught my interest. But okay, let's go back in time here to 1982. So we're picking up here in the years in gaming, and so we're at 1982 now. And so this year was, we had a lot of cool stuff that came out this year also. Um, the video game industry was kind of reaching a boiling point in 1982, and you'll see what I mean here as I kind of go through this. But there was a lot of great games that came out. The arcade scene was still pretty poppin', but at least on surface. But I think that things were happening behind the scenes though that eventually led to what ended up happening in the following year. And I'll get more into that in 1983 because I'm actually kind of excited to talk about that one. I went and researched it as well too. I have a good overall understanding of what happened with the video game crash and all, but this will be exciting to really. I'm going to try to do more of a deeper dive into it because that I do want to get some good information on because it was a monumental moment in video game history, right? That kind of shaped the landscape of where it ended up going afterwards because it could have been its demise basically. But 1982, so the year before it, right, was so I'm just going to kind of go here what I'm seeing here on Wikipedia. But so basically, okay, so kind of like I said, right, so 1982 was a peak year for the golden age of arcade video games, as well as the second generation of console video games. Um, there was a lot of games that came out that would spawn just like sequels and all that, like Dig Dug, Pole Position, um, and Microsoft's Flight Simulator, Pitfall, and the year's highest grossing video game was still Pac-Man for a third year in a row. And the 2600 Atari was still the best selling, or oh no, it was for this year was the best selling console. Um, but we also got some new consoles as well too, which I'll do a little bit of talking about those here in a bit. But just some statistics here. So the U.S. video game the U.S. arcade video game market was worth 4.3 billion, equivalent to 14 billion adjusted for inflation. The U.S. home video game market was worth 3.8 billion, equivalent to 12.4 billion adjusted for inflation. The Japanese video game market was approaching 3 billion yen, equivalent to 4.49 billion dollars, I think is what it's saying, adjusted for inflation. But in Japan, so the top highest grossing arcade video games of 1982, so number one was Pole Position, and then number two was Dig Dug, and then number three was Galaga. Those three from Namco. So Namco started making a name for themselves. And then number four was Pengo, a game from Sega. And then number five was Time Pilot. And then number six was Donkey Kong. And number seven was Frontline. Number eight was Donkey Kong Jr. Number nine was Burnin' Rubber, or Bump and Jump. And then number 10 was Mr. Doom. And so in the United States, it just says, let's see, it just says number one was Donkey Kong and Miss Pac-Man. Number two, Pac-Man. And then number three and four, Donkey Kong and Centipede, and Defender and Zaxxon. So they have them all sort of lumped together. So it looks like they're getting their data from various different places. So it's kind of all over the place here on what I'm seeing here on Wikipedia. Let's see. But for the best-selling home video game system, so number one was Pac-Man, and number two was Donkey Kong, and Donkey Kong on the ColecoVision, which we'll talk a little bit about later. And then number three was Frogger, and then number four was Defender, and then number five was E.T., interesting. And then number six, Berserk. Number seven, Space Invaders. Number eight, Asteroids. Number nine, Pitfall. And number 10, Microsoft Flight Simulator. And so then best-selling home system. So number one was the Atari 2600. It has its sales here at 5,100,000. And the number two was the Game & Watch was 4,600,000. And then number three was a Coleco Mini Arcade at 3 million. And then number four was Intellivision, and that has here the sales of 1,100,000. And then number 5 was Timex Sinclair at 750,000. And then at number 6, it has 3 of them: and the Atari 400/800, the Commodore 64, and the TI 99/4. And then then we're jumping to number 9 is the ColecoVision with 550,000. And then number 10, the Nelsonic Game Watch handheld system. Let's see. Okay, so because I took some notes down, so I'm just seeing if I'm not going to go over some of the same things here. Let's see. But there was a lot of new companies that were getting made during this time. And so some of the companies that still exist today. So let's see. So new companies. So, here's interesting. I didn't know this. Um, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, but a Dansha Boshu Center, or I'm sorry, a Daisha Boshu Service Center shortens its name to Enix, and in August establishes itself as a computer game publisher. So Enix, or Enix, I'll call it Enix, which we would know to be one of the the main creator of Dragon Quest, probably one of the main things that they're known for. But then we also got companies again, right? Some of them that still exist to this day. So we have like Argonaut, Artec, Compile, Cosme, Data Age, Distinctive Software, Dragon Data, Electronic Arts, English Software, First Star Software, GameStar, Imagine Software, Yamasoft, Lucasfilm Games, Martech, Micropose, Richard Shepard Software, System 3, Ultima Play the Game, and US Games. So yeah, interesting. So, okay. So I took some more notes down here on some information that had gone. So just to kind of go through some of the games that were coming out that were notable for this year. So again, a lot of these were in the arcades, and some of them I don't quite recall, like when they ended up coming out to the home systems. But I know Atari got a lot of these ports here, and also some of the other systems. But some of the main games here that I jotted down were things like Burger Time, which was a kind of like a fun sort of game where you're trying to stack like hamburger patties, I believe, and I think you're trying to get away from the bad guys, which I think is like a sausage and all, and they're chasing you around the level. Kind of sort of like Donkey Kong in a way, where you're avoiding obstacles and all while you're trying to build these hamburgers, if I recall right what the game is all about. But then there's Qbert, which Qbert, it's an interesting little game where it has it has sort of like I guess like these platforms that are in isometric view, and you're jumping on them, trying to avoid the enemy. And honestly, I forgot the objective to the game, because I know you're trying to jump away from these coiled snakes that are jumping around on this platform. But what I recall is that Cuber makes kind of like a weird little sound, and every now and then, I think if you die or something happens in the game, he'll have like a thought bubble above his head, and it just has a bunch of like gibberish on there. It almost seems like he's cursing. I don't know if that was the intention, but I think it's just that he's just talking something, right? And all. But the point is, I don't think that you can really make out what he's saying, at least from what I recall of it. But then pole position. And so pole position was interesting because, so out of curiosity, because I was looking at some videos and all as I was doing research for this, and I was like, so this came out in 1982 with the graphics, the scaling and all that, right? Looked kind of impressive. And so I booted it up. I have it on where I can play it on the main emulator. And yeah, I mean, for 1982, the scaling and everything and all, it's pretty smooth. So I was actually pretty impressed with that. And the animation, like when you blow up, because I mean, you touch anything in the game and your little car just blows up, was actually the animation to it and all was pretty smooth. But in a lot of the arcade cabinets, it had like a wheel and like a pedal and brake, which was pretty impressive. And they had like a stand-up arcade, and then also one where you can sit down. So they were really getting really experimental with these arcades where it was, they were almost making it like an experience, right? Almost like a carnival ride, where you get in and, you have it's a cool experience in there, right? Kind of try to mimic as much as possible, right? And all like you're actually in a car. And so this is, I would assume kind of the start of it. Well, I think there was a few other racing games I know that had racing wheels before on it, like I think one called Sprint something, I believe. I forgot, but anyways, it was just one of the more popular ones though at the time. But then we also had Dig Dug, which is a kind of a favorite of mine. I really like Dig Dug, and it's I remember I used to like playing that game in the arcades a lot. And it's you're like this dude with kind of like a air gun of some sort where you launch like a thing at the enemies. It's kind of like a string and all, and attaches to them, and you blow them up. Well, not like a bomb, but almost like by you inflate them basically, right? And then they pop. So it's it's not like violent or anything and all, but I always thought the concept of that game was pretty fun. And let's see, and then we had Joust also, which you're riding on these ostriches, and I kind of forgot the concept of the game. Are you just kind of like jousting with other players to knock him off a platform, I think. I forgot. But what I recall about this game is that I remember going to Chuck E. Cheese, and it would always seem to be like the more popular game that everyone was always around. So I never actually got to play it. And honestly, I don't think I've ever played it since. I mean, I have it on a lot of different compilations and emulated versions of it and all. I just haven't gotten around to play it. But I just remember it was pretty popular back then. And then Tron, I remember this game I remember being impressed with the arcade cabinet of it back in the day. And so Tron came out in 1982, and which was the effects at the time were pretty revolutionary. And the movie is basically Jeff Bridges is like a video game designer, and he gets sucked into his own video game. And so the aesthetics of the game and all is very much like early 80s or late 70s, early 80s video game aesthetics. And so it was kind of cool, right? Because it's a game that's not based on a video game directly, but inspired by video games. And there was a video game made out of it. And what I recall of the game, it's kind of like has a few different mini games. Like there's like you're like in a tank, and then also the light cycle, um, little racing sections that you have on it. But what I recall mainly of this game is the arcade cabinet, which had a lot of cool like neon lights and all that. And so it just sort of stood out from a lot of the arcade games around it. And so that was another one that I remember just a lot of people huddling over. I think just because it was just kind of an attraction, right? When I would draw you in. Let's see. But yeah. Oh, and also there was three games that came out of Tron for the Intellivision. But Microsoft Flight Simulator. So the first one came out this year also, and I mentioned a little bit earlier, it was one of the top 10 selling games. So it's always been a popular series for Microsoft, and I didn't know it started this far back. So that was kind of interesting to read. Um, but then there was also Popeye, which looked very much like the cartoon, so the graphics were pretty impressive in it. And so, from what I understand, Nintendo wanted to do Popeye, but they couldn't get the rights for it or something like that. So they ended up coming up with Donkey Kong, and that was a hit for them. But then I forgot who developed Popeye, but basically Popeye was actually made into a video game, and in the game you're trying to run away from the what's his name, Brute. I think the bad guy, the big hairy dude, and but yeah, the graphics were pretty impressive for it, though. Kind of looking like the cartoon from back in the day. So I do remember that was another popular arcade game. And then there was Donkey Kong Jr., where in this one you're playing Donkey Kong's son. And so in this one, Mario is kind of the bad guy where he captures Kong from the first one. And so you're his son now trying to save him. And they expanded on the mechanics of it and all. So it was, I played it, I think, a handful of times, and it's a pretty fun game. And then there was Robotron. So this game here, you're just basically killing a bunch of robots, and it was kind of like a twin stick shooter almost. But I remember that game being pretty popular too. And then Choplifter for the Apple II computer. Choplifter I got into on the Sega Master System, which came out years later, but I was kind of surprised that it had come out, this far back. So, but that's a fun game. And then Sinistar. So Sinistar, I've never played the game, but I've seen a lot of it. And so it's kind of like asteroids where you're a ship and then you're shooting like these asteroids and all. But the difference in this one though is that this boss comes out at a certain point in the game where it's like this kind of like a scary looking face, and it has like this digitized voice as it comes out that I mean it was kind of creepy, because in its digitized voice, it will say something like, "Beware, I live," or something like that, and it's just, the sound effects of the game and all, like, they really, like, made that voice loud, and also, I'm sure it probably threw off some game players from back in the day, um, but, yeah, it's in a star. It looks like it was popular for that there. Um, but yeah, but then, we had some other systems that were coming out too also. So again, it wasn't just the Atari 2600 that, and, I was kind of surprised to see how some of these other systems, how well they sold. But, we had, well, Atari's own 5200 they came out. And I couldn't find much information as to like why they decided to do this. I think maybe they were just trying to, keep up with the times and all that, and they just wanted a more powerful system. Because the Atari 2600, my guess is that some of these other systems that were coming out started to have a little bit better graphics and all that. So maybe Atari started feeling the pressure, and so they came out with this Atari 5200. And so the graphics are better on it. Like for example, Pac-Man looks more closer to the arcade, right, than what Pac-Man did on the 2600. But, it ultimately it just failed. I I would say, I don't know, I'm thinking just because the Atari 2600 was still pretty popular, and there wasn't a whole lot of games that ended up coming out for it. I mean, a lot of the games are just mostly like, I guess you can say, like, remasters of the 2600 games, and also the controller was prone to breaking apparently. Seems like they were cheaply made. And the system itself is pretty bulky. There was 2 versions of it that I saw that came out. There was one with 2 controller ports and then another one with 4 controller ports, but it only seemed like just a very small handful of games supported the 4 controller port, 'cause it just wasn't very, it just didn't last that long. But it's a pretty bulky system, but a good part of it is because the back part of the system, like behind the cartridge slot, it looks like that's where it has like a little compartment there where you lift up a lid and you can put in the controllers and also the power supply, I guess. Um, but yeah, I think it's just one of those things where, it just seems like Atari. Well, I mean, like I said, there was a lot of things happening behind the scenes that I think people were just kind of get overwhelmed with all the options that were on the market. So I'm sure that was a big part of it also. But Atari was doing good with their 2600, it seems like, as well too. So I think people weren't maybe ready to make that next jump because, I mean, back then, I don't know this for sure, but as far as if this was part of the reason why some of these systems failed, but back then, people weren't really used to like upgrading things. Now we're used to that, right? You upgrade your phone every so many years, right? You upgrade your appliances and all that, right? It wasn't quite like that back then. I'm wondering if maybe that was the same thing with the video game industry where you had an Atari, the 2600, or your Intellivision or whatever, and you just assume that's your system, right? Um, and I don't think we got used to the idea that you would upgrade your hardware every so many years, right? And all the generation started going on. Because again, this is brand new territory. This is where video games started. So that's kind of my thought on it, but I can't say for sure though. Um, but then there was a ColecoVision also that came out, and this one was probably, from what I can tell, one of the better graphic, or could output some of the better graphics of this generation, because they had a packing game that was King Kong. And so they were showing, the videos that I was watching, they were showing comparisons of King Kong running on like the Atari, and then also I believe on the Intellivision. And you can tell it's King Kong the game, but like the sprite that they used for King Kong itself just didn't really look like a gorilla. But on this one though, it looked really close to the arcade, and so looks like this one had some potential on it. Um, and I mean, they had games like Zagzon, and also that look really close to, fairly close to the arcade. But something interesting that I saw on this is that they had an adapter that could play 2600 Atari games. The Atari, not 2600 Atari, but like the system 2600. And so from what I understand, Atari tried to sue them, but they lost because it wasn't like they were stealing their proprietary. It was just the video that I saw said something like that the hardware was already available, and I think it was like just open to anyone to just put it into their own system, or their own contraption, and they can use it like that, something like that. So you can somehow you ultimately you can play Atari 2600 games on the ColecoVision. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But and it seems like the ColecoVision was picking up some steam, but it ultimately failed due to what ended up happening in 1983 with the crash. There was also the Emerson Arcadia 2001. I didn't really have a whole lot of information on this. It was a system that Emerson put out, only came out with a handful of games, and it failed. Again, probably due to the upcoming crash that ended up happening. Um, but let's see. There was also another system that was this one was interesting because I've heard about this system, but I didn't know a whole lot about it until recently when I started, doing some research on this. But it was the Vectrex. And so what the Vectrex was, so there was Vectrex graphics where there was sort of like almost like lines on the screen and all, but you can do almost like 3D looking effects on it. And so what the Vectrex was though was, I mean, it's pretty revolutionary actually. It was they were trying to do like a portable system, like the arcade on the go almost, so to speak, where it had a monitor and it had its controllers, but it had like a handle, so almost like you can take it around, and to take it to a friend's house, right? To plug it in, you still have to plug it in, right? But kind of like a portable device, and the Vectrex graphics made it pretty unique, where the system definitely has a unique look to it, and it was and it has some pretty revolutionary features on it. Like I had a light pen where you can draw on certain games, right? It was had like a drawing option, and then it also had like this kind of like a 3D glasses of some sort that you can use for some 3D games. Ultimately, the system, from what I researched, it's the I forgot the developers of the system, but they got this idea, they put it out there, and it was initially had some pretty good response to it, and it seemed like it was starting to sell pretty decently, even though it was a bit pricey at the time for I think it was like $200, which I think I saw like inflated would have been like around $500 or something like that. So it was a bit more on the pricier side. But I think the concept seemed like it was catching some attention. But again, it was victim of the video game crash, and so the system was only on the market from what I saw from 1982 to 1984. So it still kind of survived the crash, but looks like it never really went anywhere after that. But it's an interesting system. I think the concept to it is actually pretty interesting, and I can see why I kept hearing why the Vectrex was a highly sought after system for a lot of video game collectors, because it is cool. It's unique. It's almost like combining the DS and the 3DS almost all in one, right? In a way, because I mean, because of the light pen and then also the 3D glasses, but it's also its own thing. So anyway, I thought the concept of it was really cool. If you've never heard of it, just check out some videos of it. I think um, you'll find it fascinating on what the technology was that they were doing back then. Um, but yeah, let's see. Oh, and then also the D-pad on the Game and Watch. So there was the first D-pad that was made. That was on a Game and Watch little handheld console. So developed again by Gunpei Yokoi. So yeah, so he was the person that created the D-pad that we all know now as pretty much on every controller now. So that was pretty cool. So he was quite the innovator, Gunpei Yokoi. We'll hear more about him, I'm sure, as I keep going with this video game history retrospective. But some other little tidbits here. So the Pac-Man cartoon was the first show based on a video game that came out. I believe it only aired for 2 seasons, but kind of started showing that there was money to be made in video games, right? Not just from the video games themselves, but also marketing and merchandise and all that. And Pac-Man kind of being the first mascot, so to speak, was sort of spearheading that. I mean, I would say like if I had a Mount Rushmore of 4 video game characters, Pac-Man for me would be one of them. I feel like he was sort of, I mean, he was the first mascot, so to speak, right? And for video games, and also he was definitely making some waves back then to, make video games mainstream. Let's see, and then also Electronic Games was the first magazine for video games as well too. So I believe there was, I think I saw something that there was the creators, they had a column in some magazine, I think, or on the newspaper. I'm not quite sure, but eventually they branched out to do their own magazines and all. And yeah, it looks like they had a run for them several years. So um, I'm wondering if maybe those, because I remember reading a magazine in the kind of mid to late 80s, and I don't quite recall what it was, but maybe it was Electronic Games. I have to try to research that a bit. But another thing that ended up happening was that, so it's from what I understand, Atari was kind of treating some of their developers, maybe not. I mean, it sounds like kind of crappy. Where ultimately it got to the point that these developers, because they were, Atari was making a lot of money off of their works, right? But then these developers were like, well, I created that game. So kind of like a musician would create his music. I kind of want to be recognized for that work and be compensated accordingly to it. Atari seemed like they didn't like that. And so a lot of these developers ended up moving on and forming their own company, which was Activision. And so that happened like back in 1979 or so. But it looks like from 1979 to 1982, there was several lawsuits that were happening, and it looks like they ended up winning some of them, I believe. And so they ended up coming out with their. I saw that it said it came out with their first game, which was Pitfall. Um, I don't know if that's completely accurate, but that's something that I came across. But yeah, but Pitfall, right, was like one of the first games that they came out with. That was a third party game and was pretty successful. So because Pitfall was one of the more popular games of that generation there. But yeah, so a lot of interesting stuff there that was happening during this year. A lot of new technology, that just kind of came out, at the wrong time. So, because the next two things I want to touch on is what's going to lead into the next year. So, why did the crash happen, right? So this is again my understanding of it, and we're not going to get completely into the crash because again that happened more next year. But the seeds were being planted in this year here, and so there's a lot of different reasons and all that, right? But from my understanding, so we already had a video game crash back in the late '70s, which had to do, to my understanding, too many consoles out on the market. Well, what was happening now is that even though companies like Atari and the arcade seem to be booming and all that, apparently, though, what was happening though behind the scenes though was that there was a lot of money being lost all of a sudden, and it seems to be because there was just a lot of crappy software that was being put out there, just a lot of bad games that were being put out, and it was almost like too much, And again, the consumer, there wasn't like, I mean, video games were getting popular, but they weren't like what they are now, I would think, right? Where now it's like video games are very much embedded into the pop culture of our society now, where video games were still fairly new back then. It was still kind of niche, even though they were making a lot of money, but it seems like it was still fairly niche though. And there was a lot of software that was being put out there that just wasn't very good. I think I saw something that Pedigree, the dog food manufacturer, like even made a game. So it's like everyone was putting games out there, everyone was putting consoles out there, and so eventually the market just was starting to take a hit. Again, we're going to go into that more next year. But two things that are blamed for, some of the main two things that are blamed for what ultimately ended up really accelerating the crash to happen was two games. And that was the port of Pac-Man to the Atari 2600 and E.T. Now, again, I think that there was a lot of things that were building up that led to the crash, but these two are kind of blamed for kind of what ended up happening. If they weren't the um the thing that really ignited the crash to happen, they definitely didn't help. And if they put a pretty big blow to it, actually, I would think, just from what I've seen and read and all that. But Pac-Man was a big deal, right? And so Atari obviously they wanted it at some point on their home system. That was a big seller. And so the game Pac-Man, though, it's a pretty horrible port. I mean, the game looks the color choice that they use for the maze, kind of like this light blue with like these beige sort of outlines for the maze and all. It looks pretty bad, and the ghosts are constantly flickering. Out of curiosity, I tried the game out here this week, right? I was like, I just want to see like how bad it was, and it is pretty bad. I mean, like I like Pac-Man, the original version. It's cool, but this one is pretty horrific. The controls, it just doesn't feel right. Like the way you try to move through the mazes and all, it feels very kind of floaty. It doesn't seem like as responsive and all that. And it just wasn't, it's playable, but it's not a very fun game, I guess you can say. And so I can imagine for people that were really excited to play Pac-Man at home, it seems like this just wasn't the version to play or what people were hoping for. And so from what I can understand, I think Atari spent a lot of money though to get it onto the systems. And I think I saw somewhere some time ago also that they made a lot of copies that ultimately just weren't flying off the shelves. And so actually, because I think I jotted it down here. Um, yeah, and so it was a bad port, and so a lot of people were returning the copies, and they made like a lot of them, and so I mean, they lost a lot of money with that, and so that was a pretty big blow because like again, right, Pac-Man was really popular. It's like how could you botch this, But they did, and then the other one too also was E.T. So E.T. came out and it was a pretty big hit from Steven Spielberg, who was already making a name for himself, in the movie world. And so it looks like Atari wanted to fast track a E.T. game. And so I got some information on this. So because E.T. is kind of an infamous game. And so the creator, Howard Scott Warshaw, so he was an Atari programmer. And so it looks like they pretty much gave him about 5 weeks to create it. Um, which is, I mean, these games are pretty simple back then, but even then, I think that's like I think he was saying something like 5 months would have been like crazy to even think about trying to develop again, let alone 5 weeks. And so, but they wanted to fast track this game, and so he started building the game. And so I also saw something that the game was, or he showed it to Steven Spielberg himself, and I guess Steven Spielberg said something like, because I think Scott or Howard Scott was trying to do something with this game, like maybe something unique, different. It might have been maybe overambitious for what he was trying to do, but he showed it to Steven Spielberg, and I guess Steven said something like, "Couldn't you just do like a Pac-Man style game?" And so, but ultimately, I guess he was just already too far into it to try to redo the whole thing. And so ultimately, the game ended up coming out, and it initially sold okay. It was on the top 10 of the list that I saw that I read off here earlier, right, of the top 10 selling games of this year. But kind of the same with Pac-Man. The quality was really bad. There was a lot of returns on the game, and they made a lot of copies of the game. And so I'm assuming because of the licensing and all that, and the money that Atari might have tried to put to ultimately distribute the game, they lost a lot of money on it, and there was a lot of copies that went unsold. And so there's kind of a myth in the video game industry for a while that a lot of these copies got buried in, let's see, I wrote it down here, Alamogordo, New Mexico. And I saw two different numbers on this. That at first it was like estimated to be about 2 million cards, but then I saw 700,000 cards. So it kind of seems like maybe it wasn't as high as people were originally thinking. But yeah, I guess it was later confirmed that yes, they did go out there and buried a lot of these carts that didn't sold in some landfill. So you can imagine how much money they lost on that, right? And again, with Atari being one of the big players of this, behind the video game industry, apparently it's just like they lost a whole lot of money and everything just sort of like buckled under itself, right? And which is going to lead to what ended up happening next year. And so we'll get into that next year and all that. But I did want to end off with those two right there because again, I don't think it was just those two specifically that made the video game crash happen, but they were definitely a big blow at the very end of things that were already spiraling downwards. It's sort of the impression that I get from everything that I've researched and all that. But yeah, 1982 though, it's I mean, it seems like it was sort of the end of an era of what from like gaming when it started in the 70s and then in the early 80s and the big arcade boom and all that happened. And But I mean, they were pioneers, though. You know, it was the Wild West. It was people were experimenting, and a lot of crazy ideas and all were happening. And there was some cool stuff there. It's cool technology. It's just that there was just also a lot of bad decisions that were being made, and I think the video game industry learned a lot from this, as we'll see in the in the years to come. But it's interesting though talking about this now because of everything that's going on with the video game industry, nowadays, and people are thinking that there's going to be another video game crash and all that. I mean, the video game industry is in a very different place now than it was back then. So a video game crash happening now, I think, would look a lot different than what it did back then, if it were even to happen. But it's interesting though, right? Because it was highly successful at that time, but some bad decisions did make it crash. So it's not unheard of that it couldn't happen again, I guess, to some extent, right? But yeah, just interesting time though in the industry. But yeah, but that's all I got for today. So hopefully you enjoyed that, and we'll see you on the next one. Have a good one.